Today's daf we're learning is Shabbat Kuf Nun Aleph. We're starting from the very bottom. Klal Amar Abishal from Kuf Nun Amud Bet at the bottom, 2 lines from the bottom. If you remember, I'll just remind you from the middle of the Mishnah where we read from there. The Mishnah on Kuf Nun said, Ein machshichim al atchum liskor lapoalim al avi perot. You can't stand at the border of the Tchum Shabbat, the place where you're allowed to go is the farthest place you can go on Shabbat. You can't stand there in order to hire workers or to bring fruits, but you can have a machshichu lishmo, umevi perot biyado. You can stand there to do something that's allowed. It's permissible to watch your fruits. So if you want to get there to watch your fruits, you can't get there on Shabbat, but you're allowed to stand on the border so that the second Shabbat's over, you can go there because the act of watching your fruits is actually allowed on Shabbat. Klal amal Abba Shaul. And then Abba Shaul had this line. He gives a principle to this, and then the question is going to be, what's he adding and what is he disagreeing with Tanakama about? And what is this line referring to? Any act that I'm allowed to speak about on Shabbat, remember we learned you can't speak about all sorts of things on Shabbat, but there's certain things you can say. Anything I'm allowed to speak about, I'm allowed to wait on the border for. Like, for example, the case in the Mishnah. I can say, we'll see this inside, I can talk about watching my fruits because watching my fruits is allowed. I just can't talk about the other cases in the Mishnah. Let's say I can't talk about hiring workers because that's forbidden. So basically, what he says doesn't seem to add so much, and the question is, what's he really saying? So the Gemara asks, starting from 2 lines from the bottom of the previous daf, Abba Shaul Ahaya. To what is he referring? Now, we assumed he was referring to the last case that Tanakama said. Reisha Kai, so first they're going to suggest, maybe he's referring to the first part of the earlier part. Ilem Reisha Kai, where it says, maybe he means when they said you can't stand on the border, right, in order to hire workers, maybe what he's trying to say is, yes, you can't do it. If you can't say it, then you can't stay on the border. And since this is something you're not allowed to speak about, therefore you can't stand on the border waiting. But then it should have said, Hai kol sha'ani zakai b'amirato rashayni b'chashechato, the words don't match. Because Abba Shaul said, anything that I can say, I can do. And if it's referring to the part where it's written in the negative, then his words should have been said in the negative, which is kol she'eni zakai b'amirato, eini rashai b'chashechato. It should have said, if I can't say it, then I'm not allowed to stand on the border. So it can't be referring to that. Now notice, I just want you to notice one small thing, which is the difference between ani and eini is one little yud. So theoretically, it's possible that maybe his words did say that, and just the yud got lost somewhere along the way. There's a very minor difference there. But anyway, the Gemara says that's not what it says. We assume it's not referring to the first part. So it must be referring to the second part, a seifakai. But then, meaning it's referring to the second part, which says that you can stand on the border in order to watch your fruits or to bring the fruit, and then you can even bring the fruits back with you if you want. But then the assumption is that he must be adding something. He has to be adding something to Tanakama. Otherwise, what's the point of him giving this klal? So they say if that's the case, what would he be adding? Well, it's already clear that you can stand on the border for anything that you can, for something that you can say, because that's just the case we brought. You're allowed to say, I'm going to watch the fruits, and therefore the halacha was teaching you could stand on the border. But now what he might want to tell you is that anything that you're allowed, and what he's trying to say is like this. The Mishnah wasn't talking about what you're allowed to say. The Mishnah was talking about, can you stand on the border? So what they want to say is, well, the Abba Shaul was coming to say, since you're standing on the border, and that's allowed to be shomer perot, that teaches you that you're also allowed to speak about watching your fruits on Shabbat. And therefore, they're saying, if he wanted to add something, that must be what he's adding. But then, again, it's not worded properly. If he's referring to the latter part and he's adding something, the only thing to possibly add is whatever halacha Tanakam said in the Mishnah must be true also for speech. And therefore, basically saying, if you're allowed to watch your fruits stand on the border so that you can watch your fruits and leave go outside the border immediately after Shabbat, you must be able to also talk about shmirah of Perot on Shabbat. That would be his chiddush, but that can't be either because that's not what it says. This would you'd have to change the words. So therefore, that doesn't make sense either. So we're stuck and we don't know really what he's referring to. So now the Gemara says, La'olam ha'seifakai. Really, he is referring to the latter part of the Mishnah, and he is adding something, but we have to keep within the version it says in the Gemara, in the Mishnah. And what is that? So what's he adding? Abishaul hakai. He's referring to the following. Now here we're going to say he's referring to something an Amora said. Now obviously he's not referring to something an Amora said. He's a Tana. So, and a Tana lived before the Amora. He wasn't living in the time of Rav Yehuda. But what he's saying is he's referring to a case that later comes up in the name of Shmuel. That must be what he was referring to. So what is this? Ta'amar Rav Yehuda amar Shmuel. Mutar la'adam lomar l'chavero shmor li perot shebetchumcha v'ani ashmor lecha perot shebetchumi. I'm allowed to say to you, let's say my fruits are in your boundaries of Shabbat and your fruits are within my boundaries of Shabbat. We both have different boundaries. Okay, even, for example, let's say we're living in the same city, but we can each put down food before Shabbat. We'll learn about this in Eruvin, and designate that as my place for Shabbat. And then I can go 2,000 amma in that direction. And if you do it in the other direction of the city, you can go 2,000 amma in that direction. So let's say we're both in the same city, but my tchum is that way and yours is that way, and your field is in my tchum and my field is in your tchum, and I want my fruits watched. So I can say, listen, can you watch my fruits that are in your tchum, and I will watch my fruits, and I will watch your fruits that are in my boundary. Okay, one can do that. Why can one do that? Even though I'm not allowed to watch my fruits because they're not within my tchum Shabbat. But since they are within your tchum and it's allowed for you to do this, I'm allowed to say that. Okay, I'm going to take a break in the action here just to tell you some really interesting halacha that the Rashba says. This is something that I use all the time, which is that teaches you, the Rashba says, that if something is allowed to somebody else on Shabbat, you can tell them to do it. So what's a good example? When you light candles, for example, and you accept Shabbat, but someone in your house hasn't yet accepted Shabbat. So you're allowed to explicitly say, let's say, right, this happens all the time. You light candles and all of a sudden you remember, oops, forgot to do that, right? That's the time I most remember all the things I forgot to do. So my kids are around, they haven't accepted Shabbat. I say, please do this, do that, do that, do that. I can do that explicitly, and that comes from here, okay? So, because again, this is a case where it's actually Shabbat for both of them, which is even more so, right? But since each one's allowed to do, one can say that. So now Abba Shaul is referring to that possibility, okay, to this case. And what he's saying is, V'ka'ama Abba Shaul Tanakama. What he's saying to Tanakama is the following. Mi lo modi, do you not agree with me? Don't you agree that that case is allowed? Ve'ema, and if that's the case, you should have written in the Mishnah, instead of giving a specific case where you said you could go to the border to watch fruits, you should have said something more general where we could have learned also this, which is you should have said, Kol she'ani zakai ba'amirato, rashai ani la'achshich alav. You should have said, since I can say it, meaning since everybody knows that I can say, go watch my fruits, and you can, and I'll watch your fruits, even though they're out of my tchum and yours are out of your tchum. Since I can say it, I can also stand on the border for it. That would have been another way of saying the exact same thing that Tanakama said. But what he's saying is then you can teach more things by saying it. In other words, mine teaches you also that you can talk about things that you can also say things that are permitted to other people, but not for you. And those are all the things that would then teach you. Those are all the things that fall into this category that you can now stand on the border for. Okay, so now what's interesting about this is what he's basically saying is, why did you give a specific case when you could have given a general rule that would have taught you more? Why is this strange? Well, it's strange because all over the Mishnah in general doesn't give principles, right? Every once in a while we have a klal, this, that. But generally, the Mishnah gives specific cases. That's just the way the Mishnah talks. I didn't do this research, but I thought to myself that I should really check if Abba Shaul in general likes to give general principles to things. It's a good search someone could do and look and see, does Abba Shaul generally like to put these into general concepts and not as specific? Because the Mishnah all over is incredibly specific, and that's always I would say part of the problem and maybe part of the beauty of it, that we can take this case and say, well, what can we derive, what else is like this case and where does it apply, etc. But it's interesting that that's kind of his question. So now the question is, what was Abba Shaul trying to get at? What was he really feeling like if I worded it this way, what additionally would it include that Tanakama isn't really talking about? And then you would have to explain, maybe Tanakama doesn't think that those cases are included. Klal latuye mai. So what's this klal coming to include? Latuye had to Tanu Rabbanan, to include the things that come up in the following Braita. According to Tanakama, you can't, if your animal is outside the tchum and you want to bring the animal in, you can't wait there at the end of Shabbat, just waiting, right? Go to the edge of the border, wait for the animal to come. So what is the only thing you can do if your animal's outside the tchum? You can call to the animal and say, hey, come back, but you can't actually stand on the border waiting, right, to bring the animal in as soon as Shabbat's over. But Abba Shaul disagrees with this. Since I can say, come to the animal, therefore I can stand there and wait. Okay, so he basically thinks that this case would be included. And another case, okay, this is something we're going to see in the next Mishnah, that you're allowed to talk about this on Shabbat. We saw this yesterday. You're allowed to talk on Shabbat about buying a wedding dress or bringing things for, right? You're allowed to talk about anything that has to do with, or it seems anything, I don't know if it's anything, but you can talk about things that have to do with a wedding or a dead body. You can talk about bringing, let's say, aron v'takrichim, about bringing shrouds and a coffin. Ve'omrim lo lech lemakom ploni. You can even say, go tomorrow and buy the following things in the following place. And if you're not going to find in that city, go to another place, or if you don't find in that store, go to this store. You can really get into details on Shabbat about this. You can even say, this is the price I want you to spend, this is the amount I want you to spend, but if you don't find it for that price, you can spend this price. Rabbi Yehuda, as long as you don't mention the price, you're okay. Some people actually think, he thinks you can mention the price, you just can't say, and I know I owe you more money or something like that, okay, and connect it to some other money that you owe the person. But money for that specific item, some people think you can actually talk about, even according to Rabbi Yehuda. But in any case, what Abba Shaul is saying is, since you can talk about sending someone to buy something for a mate or a kala, then you can also stand at the border, ready to go the second Shabbat's over. You can do that, okay? So that's the debate between Abba Shaul, and that's why he wanted to say it in a general way to include other cases. Some people say that Tanakama doesn't include those other cases, and he thinks that those are different. And what's the difference between, let's say, the mate and the kala versus the shmirah and the perot? In other words, Tanakama thinks you could stand on the border for shmirat perot, right? Abba Shaul says it's all because you can speak. If you can say it, then you can also do it. And therefore, he includes also the mate and the kala. And Tanakama doesn't include the mate and the kala. What's the big difference? The big difference is the mate and the kala, you're actually talking about doing a malacha on Shabbat. You're talking about buying something, right? That's forbidden. When you talk about shmirat perot, it's allowed. It's just, it's outside the tchum, so you can't get to it. But it's the action is actually allowed. And that's why Tanakama think for those things, you can actually wait on the border. But in the other case, you can't wait on the border with the maid and the kala, because it's actually to do something that's forbidden to do on Shabbat. Okay, so that's why Tanakama doesn't necessarily, at least it's one of the explanations for why they don't agree. Okay, moving on to the next Mishnah. So according to the Mishnah, you can wait on the border for iskei kala and iskei amet. Lavilo aron v'tachrichim. Okay, you can actually wait on the border for this, to bring the aron and the shrouds, the coffin and the shrouds. Nuchri shevi. Now we're moving into amira la'akum. Okay, here we get much more into the sugya. We just mentioned it very peripherally yesterday, but here we really get into it. If a nuchri brings chalilim b'Shabbat, they used to use chalilim for funerals. So a nuchri brings chalilim b'Shabbat, lo yispod behen Yisrael. You can't use these for your hespedim if they brought them on Shabbat. And you can't benefit from malacha that a non-Jew does on Shabbat. Elam came baal mi makom karov, unless he brought them from within the tchum. In other words, if he brought them from outside tchum Shabbat, you can't use them. Okay, now, what does it mean you can't use them? You can't use them on Shabbat. You can't use them, it seems, even after Shabbat. Rashi goes so far as to say, you can't ever use them. They're forbidden to you forever. And this is where, right, we all think, oh, non-Jew could do work for you on Shabbat. No. If a non-Jew does it specifically for you, you cannot use this. And according to Rashi, you can't use it forever. Okay? And we'll see later in the Mishnah, they actually bring a case where it says explicitly in the Mishnah, you can't use it forever. Tosfot disagrees with Rashi about the Olamit, and a lot of the Rishonim disagree. They say, no, you'd have to wait what we call B'chdei Sheyasu, the amount of time it would take the non-Jew after Shabbat to bring the Chalilim to you. That's the amount of time. So if it would take an hour, you can use them an hour after Shabbat. And then they'd have to distinguish between this case and the case later in the Mishnah where they're going to say forever you can't use it. So now, anyway, I don't want to get into too much detail off the daf, so I'll leave it at that, but just so you should know there's a debate here. The other issue that Tosfot brings up that's very interesting is, what about hotza'ah? We're talking about the Nochri bringing these chalilim from outside the tchum. But, right, it says here, if they came from a close by place, which means, it's other words for, within tchum Shabbat, then you can use them. Now, what about the fact that the non-Jew carried them in the public domain on Shabbat? Why aren't we worried about that? So Tosfot says, and this reminds us of something we saw in the beginning of the Masechet, if you remember, is hotza'ah a malacha like all the other malachot, or is what we call hotza'ah, is it a malacha gru'ah? It's like not a real serious malacha. So we call gru'ah, like not a strong malacha, right? It's something, the whole issue of carrying is right, even though it's very major in the Masechet, in terms of actions, it's pretty minor. It's not like building a house or something like that. So Tosfot says, if you look quickly, he says, in Elin Kem Ba'u Mimakom Karov, Tema L'Rebbe Mamahane Shaba'u Mimakom Karov Halo V'Am Derech Reshut HaRabim. Right? So he says, I don't understand the difference. So skip 2 lines. V'yesh Lomar Dehevi Mimakom Karov Lo Mahane Kol Kach Hava'ato. He says, it's not like the non-Jew did so much for him. The fact that he brought it through the public domain, if it wasn't so far away, he didn't really do so much for the Jew. And that's why it's okay to use. And in other words, you could say, what he's really saying is, it's unclear what Tosfot means by that. He didn't really help you so much. But it seems like maybe what he's saying is hotza'ah is a malacha gru'ah. It's not a significant malacha, so he didn't really benefit you so much from the fact he brought it. If he brought it outside tchum, that already is something else. But hotza'ah itself, carrying, is not such a serious malacha, and therefore you didn't benefit so much from it. And therefore we're not going to forbid it. Anyway, it's a good question. The answer is helpful, but it doesn't totally resolve the issue. Anyway, so let's go back to our Mishnah. So the first thing it said was, if they bring chalilim, you can't use them. Elin kem ba'u mimakom karov. Again, can't use them. It's unclear. For sure not on Shabbat. For sure not immediately after Shabbat. The question is, how far after Shabbat, and can you ever use them? Asulo aron v'chafrulo kever yikaver bo Yisrael. But if the non-Jew did it for himself, okay, I don't think he dug his own grave, but what he meant is he did it, maybe he wanted to sell the grave, maybe he wanted to do it for a friend who was a non-Jew, but he basically did all this, not, okay, and most people we're going to see in the Gemara, they view this case as a stam case. That means we don't know who he did it for. It wasn't clear he did it for the Jew. We just don't know. Then the Jew can benefit from it. In other words, there's a difference between if it's clear he's doing the malacha for the Jew versus if he did it in a way that could have been for the Jew, could have been for anybody else. So then you can actually use it. Yikaver bo Yisrael. Ve'im b'shvil Yisrael. But if he did it for the Jew, and here we get it, if he dug the grave for the Jew specifically, lo yikaver bo olamit. You can never be buried in that spot. Okay? You cannot benefit from that malacha that was done for a Jew. So again, if you don't think the Reisha is the beginning part about the chalilim is asur olamit, then you have to distinguish what's the difference between chalilim and kever. Right? Some people say chalilim you bring for lots of people. Like a lot of people can use chalilim, whereas a kever can only be used by one person. So if he did it for a Jew, right, he 100% did it for the Jew because it was meant for one person. Whereas chalilim, if he brought for a Jew, you could say, well, he brought for the Jew, figuring other people would then use it also. That's one explanation that's brought, okay? Because then it's something that's not 100% designated for that Jew and for nobody else. Okay. Now we'll start with the Gemara. My mimakom karov. So what do we mean mimakom karov? So we're going to have a machlok at Rav and Shmuel. And again, there's a debate about how to understand this. I think I'll just stick with one explanation. Rav amar mimakom karov mamash. Rav says, okay, and again, it's unclear what this means exactly, but according to most Mefarshim, it means mimakom karov mamash, meaning you have to know for sure that it was brought within the tchum. Many times you have no idea where the non-Jew brought it from. Okay, I'll give you a good example of this. Receiving newspapers on Shabbat morning. Now, you don't know, were those newspapers brought from outside the tchum or were they in the tchum? Now, it's a little bit of a problem. They'd have to be within the tchum before Shabbat, and they're not usually printed before Shabbat. But, right, normally people print newspapers overnight. But there's an issue with newspapers or mail, for example. Let's say you get a catalog. That's a better example, okay? A catalog comes on Shabbat morning to your house, right? This wouldn't happen in Israel, but it would happen in Chutz La'aretz. So the catalog comes to your house on Shabbat morning. You're allowed to look at it, right? It was prepared before Shabbat. It was ready before Shabbat. It was printed. But are you allowed to read it on Shabbat? Forget about, okay, maybe it'll make you think about buying, and that's a whole separate issue. Some people just enjoy reading catalogs, not even because they're ever going to buy anything from it, but they like looking at the pictures, whatever. So anyway, let's just assume you resolve that issue. The problem is, it might have been brought from outside tchum. This is a great case if you have no idea. You don't know where it was when Shabbat started. So Rav would say you'd have to know that it came in makom karov mamash. You'd have to know. And if you don't know, then you have to assume it came from outside the tchum, and you wouldn't be able to. U'shmuel amar cheshinan shema chutz l'tchum lanu. No, you can. Now, cheshinan is usually used in a negative way. He's in a stringent way. You have to worry that may be this. And that's why some people explain Rav and Shmuel the opposite. I'm not going to get into that explanation. Some people say it's actually the flip of what I just said because of the cheshinan lashon. But most people explain what Shmuel says is you can assume that instead of saying we're worried that, more like you can assume that it might have lanu means it slept, meaning last night it was within the walls of the city. Okay, and then it wouldn't really be chutz l'tchum; it would be more like within the tchum, but that it's within the walls. Okay, and that it was within the boundaries. So now dika matnit in kavatei de Shmuel. Now my reading of the way I explained it, that Shmuel is more lenient, matches the version of the Gemara. If you go by the opposite version, then things have to change here, and the people who read it that way have to read the rest of the Gemara in a different way, because otherwise it makes no sense. But dika matnitin kavatei de Shmuel, our Mishnah supports Shmuel de Katane, says in our Mishnah, asalo aron v'chafar lo kever yikaver bo Yisrael. Here it sounds like the non-Jew did it stam. That's what I said when we get to the Gemara. We're going to see. The non-Jew did it for himself, but that means sort of we have no idea really who he was doing it for, and yet it says you're allowed to use it. So that means stam is allowed, even if you don't know whether it was within the tchum or not. It seems like the same kind of issue. Alma misfeka shari, right? When you're in doubt about it, we allow it. Hachanami, so therefore you'd say the same in our case, misfeka shari, that it's allowed if it's a case of doubt. B'tanya kavatei de Rav, and here's a brayta that supports Rav. Ir she'Yisrael v'nachrim darimba. We're now going to have a case again where stam, you don't know what it was done for, and Rav is machmir. So here also we're going to see that if you're not sure, in this brayta it's going to say Rav is machmir. So Tanya kavatei, it actually should say tznan, it's a Mishnah. So tznan kavatei de Rav. Ir she'Yisrael v'nachrim darimba. There's Jews and non-Jews living in the city. There was a beit hamerchatz, a bathhouse open on Shabbat. If most of the people in the city are nochurim, le'erev rochetz b'miyad. So at night, you can already, as soon as Shabbat's over, you can go bathe there with the hot water they warmed up on Shabbat, because the assumption is they warm the hot water up for the majority of the people. And who would that? Non-Jews. So there's no problem with malacha a non-Jew does for himself on Shabbat. Imrov Yisrael, but if the majority of the people in the city are Jews, yamtin ad kadesh yechamu chamin. Then you have to wait until the hot water is heated up. Mechze al mechze ad shekadesh yechamu chamin. But if it's 50-50, and this proves Rav, meaning if it's 50-50, you're not sure who the people in the bathhouse warmed the water up for. And then we say you have to wait until the water was heated up, right? Until the time it would have taken to heat up the water. There you see that a stam case, if you're not sure, there goes Rav, and he explains, mimakom karov mamash. You have to know for sure. If you don't know for sure, then you have to wait. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, ba'ambati ktana, im yesh barishut rochetz b'miyad. And if there, now he adds, this doesn't have to do with our topic. We already got our proof for Rav from here, but Rabbi Yehuda adds here that if there was a reshut we're going to see in a minute, means an important person in the city, an important non-Jewish person. If there was an important non-Jewish person in the city, rochetz b'miyad. This is interesting. What's the issue? You can assume that they must be heating up the water, that they keep enough water heated just in case that guy shows up. So therefore, in a city like that, there's an important, prominent person who might come to the bathhouse, you can actually assume that they heated the water for him. But now the Gemara is going to say something a little different than I did, which is my reshut. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav Yitzchak Bered Rav Yehuda, Im yesh ba'adam chashuv sheyesh lo 10 avadim shemechamemim lo 10 kumkumim bevat achat, v'ambati ktana mutar la lirchotz b'miyad. Okay, so what does it mean to be a reshut? It's someone who's an important person that has 10 servants working for him, that they could each heat up their own kumkum, right? And within a minute, right, they could quickly each heat up their own water, and you would have water to fill up that small bath. So therefore, in a small bath that could be filled up by these 10 servants of his, then you can actually use that small bath and do it miyad, even if those 10 servants didn't do it. We're now going to say two things. One is it's super easy to heat up the water for him because everybody's heating up the water and it happens very quickly. This is like cooking for Shabbat, right? When you have a lot of people in the kitchen. Lately, my girls have been around. We all cook together in the morning, and it happens much quicker than if I just do it by myself. So like that, you can heat up the water super fast. But it also, even though the Gemara doesn't say this, it seems it's also clear that it's because the assumption is that people are making sure the water's hot in case the person shows up. Asulo aron v'chafrulo kever. So now we get to the part about if they did, right? Okay, now it's a little tricky which line we're referring to. There's now two lines left in the Mishnah. One is if the non-Jew does it for himself, okay, then the Yisrael can use the grave. And the second line was, but if he does it for the Jew can never be buried there. So there's two ways to read this. I'll see if I can read you them in both ways, just timing-wise, but I think I'll do it anyway because it's interesting. Amai. So why is this allowed? Okay, so now let's assume it's referring to the last line. The Jew cannot be buried there if the non-Jew did it for the Jew. So why? Why don't we allow you to do it in the time it would take for him to dig it up again? Why do we say it's forbidden forever? To which the Gemara answers, Amar Ula, be'omeh ba'asratya. We're talking about it was in a very public place. It's in a very public place that he dug this grave, right? The Sratya is the street, the main thoroughfare. Everyone knows, everyone saw the non-Jew digging it, which means that everyone's going to know that was something dug for the Jew on Shabbat. And when they see the Jew buried there, everyone will always say, oh, he's buried in the kever that they dug for him on Shabbat. So because it was done publicly, we don't allow it forever. Tinach kever, so fine. That explains the kever case, because the kever could be in the middle of the street, everybody knows. But aron ma'ika lememar, but what about the coffin? Amar Rabbi Aval, mutala kivlo. It means when the aron was brought and put on the kever right there in public, and it was also done publicly. Okay, that's one way to read it. The other way to read it, because what's the case? The Mishnah has two extremes. If the non-Jew did it for himself, it's entirely permitted. It doesn't say anything about bichdei sheyasu. It seems like you could bury immediately after Shabbat. Then it said, and if he does it for the Yisrael, it's forbidden forever. So the first way of reading it was, when we say bichdei sheyasu, we mean, why is it forbidden forever? Why don't we allow bichdei sheyasu? The second way of reading it is, why does it say you can use this grave immediately? Why don't we say yamtim bichdei sheyasu, that you should have to wait for the amount of time it takes to bury him? So that, for him to dig it up. So then they say, Bomeh ba'asratya. It's because it was in public. And wait, so now I have to remember, why is this? Since it was in the street, why do we allow you to do it immediately? Maybe because it was obvious that he didn't do it for you. I think that's the issue. Since it was done publicly, it was very clear he did it for his own sake and not for anyone else's sake. Maybe that's how they explain it. And then they say the aron, why, and then mutala kivro. I'm not sure. It could be I'm not getting that 100%. It could be I forgot exactly why that answers it. But this is an opposite way of reading it, that it's asking more, why don't you have to wait? Okay? Why do we allow you to do it immediately? Why wouldn't you have to wait? And the reason is you don't have to wait because it was done publicly. And then I guess the issue is you did it publicly for the non-Jew, and therefore it's obvious. Okay. Mishnah. You can do anything to deal with the dead body, although it's not true everything. We'll see what. Okay, you can wash it or put the oil on the body. You just can't move any limbs. Why can't you move any limbs? Because remember, a dead body is muktzah, so you can't move any limbs. You can move it. Let's say, what's the issue? If it's lying on a pillow, the problem is, again, in the days when they didn't have refrigeration, right? We refrigerate dead bodies now. they didn't have refrigeration. So what did they do? They wanted it to be on the ground. The ground was generally cooler. But if it was on a pillow where it kept it warm, you don't want that. It'll rot. So you can pull the pillow out and the body will fall onto the ground. Hopefully not fall, but kind of lie down on the ground. And then it could go on the sand. Bishvil sheyamtin. Yamtin means, it really means wait, but what it really means here is that it will go on the ground so it'll cool off. Koshrinet halechi. You can tie the jaw. Lo sheyale ele shelo yosif. Let's say the jaw is open. You don't want it to open anymore, so you can tie it in place so it stays where it is, but you can't actually close the jaw because if you do that, again, you're moving. V'chein korah shenishbera, another, it's not exactly a similar case, but let's say you have a beam that breaks in your house. Somchino ta b'safsal u'ba'arukot hamita. You can stop it from falling anymore, just like the jaw is falling. Here, the beam is falling. You can prevent it from falling anymore, but lo shetaleh ele shelo tosif. You just can stop it where it is. You can't actually pick it up because it's muktzah. And additionally, there's a problem. It might look like you're building. So you can just stop it where it is. But notice also what you can use. You can only use a bench or parts of the bed, which are not muktzah because they're usable, as opposed to taking a new beam from somewhere that would be muktzah, right? Because generally wood is used for burning and therefore muktzah. So you can only do it in a way that you avoid muktzah issues and you avoid it looking like building. Now the Gemara starts off and says, "V'hama Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel." But didn't Rav Yehuda say in the name of Shmuel, "Ma'aseh b'talmido shel Rabbi Meir, shenichnas acharav lebeit hamerchatz, bikesh ladiach karka." He came after Rabbi Meir into the bathhouse and he said he wanted to wash off the floors. Now the floors in the bathhouse were different than floors in regular houses. In regular houses, we talked about they were made of dirt and you have to worry you're going to flatten out the ground. You can't sweep anything. Certainly you can't pour water. But in the bathhouse, you want muddy floors, right? It's like when you walk out of the beach and you wash your feet and then you walk on the sand again, right? You don't want that. So they put stone floors into the bathhouses. Now, what's the issue? Well, the issue is that stones are muktzah. So what the student thought that when Rabbi Meir said, "Bikesh ladiach karka amar lo ein medichin," you can't do this, or lasuch karka amar lo ein sachin. So we're assuming that why can't you do that? Because since the stones are muktzah, you're not allowed to pour water on them or anoint them. So why are you allowed to do that with a dead body if the dead body is muktzah? So they say, because karka b'karka michlafa, meit b'karka lo michlaf. The reason they don't allow you to do it on the floors, even though these floors, it's not an issue of flattening out the ground, but you might say, well, if I wash the floors in the bathhouse, you might think I could wash the floors in my own house. That's why they don't permit it. But with a dead body, nobody's worried about you confusing that with the floor, and therefore they obviously allow you to do it to the dead body. Now they say, kol atruye mai. So kol again, right? You can do any tzarchei hamet, then it lists for you a bunch of things, but it must be coming to include more things. So what is it coming to include? Latruye hadetanu Rabbanan, as appears in the following braita. Mivi'im klei mekar uklei matachot. You take cold utensils or metal utensils, uminichim al kreso, and you put them on the stomach of the dead body. Kedei shelo tafuach. You want to prevent swelling. What generally happens is the body will swell, right? There's gases that are released from the body when a dead person dies, and when a person dies, and it causes swelling in the body. So in order to prevent swelling, you put, again, utensils that will not heat up the body, but will, keep it more cool, and to prevent it from swelling. And you can put cloth into the holes, the openings in the body, so that no wind gets in, and again will cause things to swell. They actually do this in a Torah. Shlomo said the following. Okay, we're now going to quote a pasuk from Kohelet, which we're going to darshan actually even more later tomorrow in tomorrow's daf. Okay, it's describing what will happen when somebody dies. That's the private parts of a man. Basically what they're saying is these parts are going to get, blow up or swell. This is the stomach, okay, where it's going to basically break and it's going to swell and then burst. Okay, this is a reference to what will happen to a person's stomach when they die. This is the excrement that's going to come out of his body, okay, that will go el habor. We're going to explain later. It actually goes like in his face, exactly what that means, but basically excrement's going to come out of the body. And here's a verse that talks about this. I'm going to, it's one of these bad nevuot, I'm going to scatter the excrement on your faces, the excrement of your chagim, of your holidays. So what does that mean? The excrement of your holidays. Amar Rav Huna v'Amar le Amar Rav Chaga. Elu b'nei adam shemenichim divrei Torah v'osim kol yamehem kachagim. Okay, these are people that don't spend their holidays learning Torah, but they don't spend their days learning Torah. They make all their days like a holiday. And they go out celebrating, partying all the time, right? I was thinking, we learned earlier in the Masechet about someone who said, the dapim about Sudash the Sheet, and the people who said I should get rewarded because I do this, one of the things someone said is if you say Hallel every day, right? He says, I want to get rewarded because I say Hallel every day. How could you say Hallel every day? Someone who says Hallel every day is Mecharef and Begadef. It's like cursing God. And then they say, well, what he means is Pesukei D'Zimra, not Hallel. You can't say Hallel every day. You can't treat every day like a holiday, right? Then the holidays are not special. Notice, by the way, that some people think it was said by Rabbi Chaga. It's a play on words, Chaga, Chagim, right? That he said, we sometimes have that. My favorite is Rabbi Zuhama. She talks about the Zuhama, okay? Right, Zuhama is the bad stuff, disgusting. Okay, Amar Rabbi Levi, Amar Rabbi Papi, Amar Rabbi Yeshua. Lachar shlosha yamim. Now he describes what happens after 3 days, and here there's a nice little message in this. After 3 days after death, kresonit bakat. This is what happens. The stomach explodes. V'nofel lo al panav, and the excrement comes out of the body when the stomach explodes. Whatever's in it comes out and goes and falls on the face of the dead body. V'omeret lo, and why does it go in its face, right? Like, you know how we say in your face, right? This is what it means. Okay, this doesn't mean literally, it means figuratively. V'omeret lo tol ma shenatata bi, right? This is what you stuck into me, now you're getting it back. Okay, and this is basically telling you, watch what you eat, be careful what you eat, because eventually it's going to come out and in your face. In other words, we all know that sometimes we overeat and then we say, oh, why did I do that? Why did I do that to myself? Right? This is basically what it's saying. When you die, all that bad stuff you overstuffed yourself with is going to come out and say, look what you were doing. And I think this is connected a little bit with the making every day like a chag, and you just celebrate and you eat and you don't think about anything. Okay. Ein matzmin et hamet b'Shabbat. New Mishnah. You can't close the eyes on a dead person on Shabbat. Again, this is moving. The eyes would be muktzah. Okay, now when a person dies, I saw this in the note in the Koran, they explain that the body dries up and hardens, and you won't be able to close the eyes. So people wanted to close, if the eyelid was open, they want to shut it on Shabbat, even because so that it won't get stuck in that position. But you can't do that on Shabbat. When someone's on their way to dying, okay, you see them kind of, the death is right there. You can't close the eye because that will bring death upon them quicker. If you do that, you're basically murdering someone. Okay, it's very interesting that they say that because the person's about to die anyway, but you can't hasten their death. Tanu Rabbanan. Okay, says exactly what the Mishnah said. Mashal lener shekava v'holechet. It's like a candle that's about to go out. Adam minechetz ba'oaleh. You just put your finger right there, right as the candle is about to go out. Miyad kavta. So that's the image here. Tanya, another brighter. Rashba gomer. So what if you want it to happen? You can do it indirectly. How do you do it? Here's a trick. I'm not sure if this is on Shabbat. It sounds like it's saying on Shabbat. This is how you would do it, right? Because we're talking about a mate here. We're not talking about someone who's alive. Someone who's alive, you would just do it, right? Sorry, it clearly has to be talking about on Shabbat. So what do you do? So is you don't move it yourself, but you're allowed to, you can make it happen. You put wine in its nostrils. You put oil between its eyelids. You hold on to the two toenails, and this causes the eyelashes, not the eyelids, and this causes the eyes to close. Okay, it sounds like Chinese medicine a little bit, right? You move the toes, and this causes something else to happen. Anyway, that's what they say. Tanya Rashba Gomer. Now we're talking about death, and we're basically going to talk about death now and life, the life versus death. Because the Mishnah basically put life versus death, right? How you deal with a person who's still alive and not Siman 9 versus a person who's dead. Tinok ben yomo mechalalim alav et Shabbat. A baby who's just born, you can do Chilul Shabbat. David Melech Yisrael made ein mechalalim alav et Shabbat. But if David Melech Yisrael died, you can't be mechalel Shabbat. Tinok ben yomo mechalalim et Shabbat. Why is that? Right? We're basically saying a little teeny baby compared to David HaMelech, right? But when David HaMelech is dead, he's kind of worth less than the tinok that just was born. So why do we allow Chilul Shabbat for the Tinok Ben Yomo? Amra Torah, Chalel alav Shabbat echad, kadesh yishmor Shabbatot harbeh, right? You can be Chalel Shabbat so that, and this is all about the concern that maybe the Tinok Ben Yomo won't survive, right? We want to help him survive so that in the future he could do mitzvot. Zaviv melech Yisrael meit, ein mechalelim alav, kevan shemet adam, batel min ha-mitzvot. Once someone's dead, they can no longer do mitzvot anymore. V'hainu dam Rabbi Yochanan, b'meitim chofshi. What do we learn with this verse? Why are b'meitim? Why are they free? He's now free from mitzvot. V'tanya Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer, Tinok ben Yom Chai ein tzarich l'shomro min hachudal min achbarim. Another difference. The creepy crawly creatures, they don't get to the Tinok ben Yomo. Okay, they stay away from even a little baby. Okay, and as, right, you all know this is when your little kids are scared. We always say the animals are more scared than you are, right? That you don't have to worry about them. They don't even get to little kids. They stay away from humans in general. Aval Og Melech HaBashan mate, okay, even Og, he was described as being huge, this giant. He dies. Okay, still they're going to get to him. Okay, the rats and the weasels. Right, this is the pasuk from Noach. Your fear will be upon all the animals. Okay, the animals will fear man. That's what it says in Noach, and they learn. This is why we do shmirah on a body. Okay, that's the reason, which is interesting because the reason is no longer relevant today, which is why shmirah in Israel is very uncommon, because the whole reason for shmirah on a dead body is to prevent from creepy crawlers getting in there. Nowadays, they're in protected places, they're in a refrigerator, no animals are getting in there, there's less of a concern, or there's no concern really for this issue. Amar Papa, Naktina, he says, we have a masoret that Ariya Beit Lo Nafil, and a lion doesn't attack two people when they're together. They say, what do you mean? I've seen it happen. Or we see this does happen. So they say, Rami bar Abba, as he says, the only time, this fascinating line, the only time a lion will attack a human is if the human starts acting like an animal. Okay, when humans act like animals, then the animals attack them. Shneimar Adam biyikar bal yalin, nimshal kebehemot nidmu. Okay, and a person will not sleep in kavod, meaning if he doesn't treat himself with, or he doesn't act with respect, he'll be like the behemoth. And that's when the animals will attack him. Amar Rabbi Chanina, there's a bit of an issue here because Rav Papa says we know that he won't attack two people. What about the fact that we just said he won't attack even one person because the animals fear man? But we won't address this question, but just know it's a question. Amar Rabbi Chanina, asur lisham b'bayit yechidi. You shouldn't ever sleep alone in a house. This goes back to two people, right? The lion won't get to. Also, you shouldn't sleep alone in a house. It's more dangerous. Again, maybe things will attack you if you're one person by yourself. Or, according to many people, we're really talking about your own fears. If you sleep by yourself, sometimes you have a lot of fears and it scares you. And that's what they say. This evil spirit will get him. Often evil spirits are your own psychological fears. Okay? You shouldn't sleep alone if it's going to scare you to sleep alone. Okay, now we're going to get into all other thing, which is do while you can, right? Before you get old and you can't anymore, or give tzedakah. There's all different explanations here. Give tzedakah while you still have money, because maybe you'll become poor. And if you have opportunity, means, and you have opportunities to do it. Maybe there'll come a time, some people say this time about the future, when there's not going to be any poor people anymore, and then you won't be able to do the mitzvah because there'll be nobody to help. Everything will be, this perfect utopian world. Or before you get too old and you can't do it anymore. And here we learn it from Shlomo, from Kohelet, okay, remember God when you're in your youth, until come the bad days. What are the bad days? Sorry to say this to some people, right? Elu yemei hazikna. Okay, the yemei zikna, Shlomo views as bad days, meaning because you won't have opportunities to do things the way you did when you were younger. What does it mean? The second part of that pasuk, there will come a time where you won't be able to do anything. We won't be able to say, I want to do things. In other words, at this point, there'll be no purpose to the mitzvot anymore. You won't be able to give tzedakah maybe, or there's different interpretations as to what you won't be able to do anymore. Upliga de Shmuel, and this disagrees with Shmuel. Damar Shmuel, ein ben haolam hazeh limat Mashiach, ela shi'abu machiyot bilvad. Shenemar ki lo yichdal ev yom mikerav haaretz. This whole thing that we just read disagrees with the position of Shmuel, who thinks that in Yemona Mashiach, right, there's something, right, we don't know what's going to be. He says, and there's a very famous line, there's going to be no difference other than we will have our own sovereignty. But other than that, life is going to be normal. It's not going to be this utopian world. There's still going to be mitzvot. There's still going to be people who are poor. And that's a big debate. Tanya Rabbi Elazar HaKapar. L'olam yivakesh adam rachamim al midazo. You should always ask for rachamim about becoming poor. Why? In other words, always pray to God that you don't become poor. She'im hu lo ba, ba beno. Ve'im beno lo ba, ben beno ba. Okay? So, ba ben beno. Okay? Ben beno ba shene'emar ki biglala davar hazeh. This comes up in a week and a half in the Parsha. Because of this, Tanad be Rabbi Ishmael, how did they learn this? Galgalu shechozer ba'olam. Biglala davar hazeh, they translated it, it's a galgal, meaning now one day you're poor, next day you'll be rich, or one day you're rich, next day you'll be poor. We see this in stories all the time. We saw this from, I think it was Rav Chisda the other day, right, who said, I was poor, when I was poor I didn't eat, when I was rich I didn't eat, right? That he also was changed, and this is something that it's cyclical. So it won't happen to you, but it might happen to your future generations. Amar Rav Yosef, Naktinan Haitzor V'Merabanan Lo Ma'ani. We learn, we have a tradition that Talmidei Chachamim do not become poor. This is strange, right? What do you mean? We see this all the time, right? This comes up all over the Gemara. The Talmidei Chachamim often, not always, but often are poor. So they say, well, what we mean is, even if they become poor, they don't have to go knocking on doors begging for food. Now, why is this? Three possible reasons. Either because they're smart enough to take care of themselves, that they don't get to that bad a level of poverty. Number two, their Torah protects them. Okay, it's a metaphysical thing, right? God will protect them. Number three, people will worry about them because they're Talmidei Chachamim to make sure that they don't have to, like they'll bring them what they need. Now we have two stories we're going to see today with people and their wives. Rabbi Chia says to his wife, if a poor person comes to the door, give him bread. So that when our sons get poor, somebody will help them. What are you, cursing my children? Right? If you learn the Gemara, you would know this. You know, his wife, right? She obviously wasn't learning. He says, the pasuk says it, Ki biglala davar hazeh. I was just referring to the fact that maybe at some point, one of our children will become poor. What do we learn from that verse? If you have mercy on other people, God will have mercy on you. This is exactly what he was saying to his wife, right? Kind of not through God. He was saying, people, if I help people, people will help me, but sort of God also. If you don't have rachamim on other people, mercy, God won't have mercy on you. Now we're going to go back to these verses in Kohelet, and from here we're going to start darshaning the verses that started with in your youth, right? Because the bad days are coming, the days of when you become old. And he says here, okay, until when the sun starts to get dark. This is your, what is it, your forehead? I forget what that is. Usually padachat is forehead. This is your neshama. It's your forehead. I guess because it means your forehead will, I don't know what it means about your forehead exactly, but it's like a sign of death is coming. It's a hadachat and the chotem. It's the forehead and the nose. V'hayareach zon neshama. V'kochavim elu alisato. Right, the soul. The kochavim are your lisatot, your cheekbones. V'shavu ha'avim achar geshem. And then what happens? The clouds come. Now, what happens with cloud? Your cloud of vision. Zoma orinav shaladam sholech achar bechi. If you cry too much, what will happen? Then you will stop seeing well. Amar Shmuel, I see here 1 second. On a young person, the forehead and the nose shine with health like the sun. I see, that's what it's saying, that on the young person, that's, a sign of life. And then as time goes on, these things start to darken. So now they're going to start talking about tears, and we'll end with this for today. Amar Shmuel, Haidimata Adar Be'in Shnin. The first 40 years you cry, Hadra. Doesn't affect your vision at all. Mikam va'elach, okay, if you thought old was old, no, we're now talking 40. Okay, at age 40, it's all downhill. What happens? Lo hadra. Already when you cry, it blocks your vision. It makes your vision bad. This kohl that they would use on their eyes, type of eyeshadow that they use for medicinal purposes, it's good for the first 40 years. Even if you fill it up like the needle of the weavers, that thickness, ukme moking. It'll prevent you from getting worse, but it won't be able to help you anymore. It won't cure you. Why is he telling you this about the weaver's implement? That the more you put, the more it's going to be effective. Last thing, Rabbi Chanina Shchiva lebarte, his daughter died. Lo hava kabachi alein, he didn't cry for her. Amra le debitu, the wife says to him, Tarni, go let afikat mi beitach. What? Like you lost a chicken? What? That's what you're, a rooster? That's what you're acting. How could you not cry? What are you, crazy? Amra le tarte. Two things. Tichla v'ivara. What? Not only am I going to be an av shakul that my daughter died, but now I'm going to also be blind, right? Is it bad enough my daughter died? I don't want to get blinded. I'll leave you on this idea. There's 6 kinds of tears. Some are good, some are bad. Are bad. Okay, beit hakisei, right? When you're constipated and tears come out of your eyes, and smoke and tears. But shalsam, okay, medicine, right, from medication. V'shal schok, from laughing, right? Sometimes, or happiness, you cry. V'shal perot, yafot. You cut onions or things like that, and it causes you to tear. That's actually good for you, okay? You can think about why, and we'll end with that for today. And we'll continue tomorrow with the verses from Kohelet. Have a good day, everybody.